Hello my friends, and welcome to Panzer Corps 2, the Good to Great Infantry Tactics Guide. So, I got asked by a few people this kind of question of how do you go from being a good player to a great player to a really good player. So all of you will get Panzer Corps on the 19th of March when it comes out, and then you'll have the opportunity to play it. And I'm pretty sure the vast majority of you will very quickly understand the basics and become average or good players, or even some of you might become great players. So, it comes naturally to most people to get to an average level, let's say. How do you go from that position to being really good? And the answer is practice, of course. But practice needs to be good practice in order for it to benefit you. You have to practice in a particular way to get the knowledge that you need to play well. You know, there's a lot of people just practice by just playing the game over and over and over and over, and that can be good practice. But it's not what I would call directed practice. So today I'm going to cover infantry as a practice topic. So normally I wouldn't record this kind of stuff, so I would just sit down and I would be like, okay, today my practice is about infantry. I want to understand everything about infantry, how it works, its effectiveness, etc, etc, etc. I want to know everything there is to know about infantry. So first thing I do, I'll set the difficulty to the hardest difficulty, because there's no point in practicing on any difficulty apart from the hardest difficulty. Because you need to understand the game as it functions when you're playing on the hardest difficulty. Because the hardest difficulty does actually give an accuracy bonus to the enemy. Then, what you want to do is you want to go in the advanced options, set your randomness preference. That's totally up to you, that's to taste. I'll put 10% just because I like a little bit of randomness, but I don't like my randomness to be game deciding in any way. And then what you want to do is you want to set undo mode for any action, that's fine. Unlimited uses, because we're just going to practice, right? So we don't care about undoing. Like, I normally will not undo a move unless it's like a misclick or something. If I make a bad attack or I scout in the wrong direction, that's it. I've done that and I'm moving on. Of course, I record my games and I have the discipline to not undo genuine errors. So when you play for real, you want to set the undo thing to movement only. That prevents you from undoing when you've made a bad attack or a bad scout, but still lets you undo misclicks. Most misclicks can be undone. But anyway, that's not the point. We're practicing, so we're going to just make things comfortable for us to practice, to test, to analyze. So the next thing you should do, you can turn the fog of war off if you just want to see everything for your practice run. You don't have to. I'm going to leave it on here because it doesn't really matter for what I want to do. Likewise, I'm just going to leave the turn limit on because I want to understand how quickly I progress based on my practice topic of infantry. And I'm going to select custom army, which allows me to build the army for the first mission instead of getting the default army. All pretty simple so far. Okay, so we'll pick Poland South just because. Doesn't really matter which one we pick. Okay, so this is our practice game, so let's call this practice, okay? Practice game. We're going to look at infantry. I could grab infantry general here. I'm not going to, because I want to understand how infantry works. Just as a default thing. Learning how they work in the best possible scenario for them is not necessarily helpful to you. It doesn't necessarily help you in a standard campaign. So, you know, it's all well and good, say, if I'm practicing tanks to select Panzer General and Master of Blitzkrieg and Perimeter Control. All of these things would really benefit tanks. But that doesn't help me learn what tanks are like day to day when I don't have those things. Okay, so we just leave this blank. press accept. In fact, what I am going to do is I'm going to put Killer Team on, just because Killer Team is quietly one of the best things in the game. At least in the early game. Kind of funny, actually, but I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so let's end the briefing. Aiming assistance. Okay, that's not that great. No retaliation. When attacking enemy units, don't shoot back. That's amazing. That is amazingly powerful. Overwhelming attack. Any damage to enemy units is enough to force them to retreat. That is also amazing. In fact, those two combined are incredible. This is what I mean by Killer Team is actually quietly really good. Okay. So, here's the first mission. Deployment phase. So how are we going to practice infantry? Well, what we're going to do is we're just going to buy a load of infantry, right? I mean, it's all well and good, you know, we can analyze the stats and all that kind of thing, you know. We know that cavalry have got very high movement, but they are pretty much quite vulnerable to everything. So they have like a sort of standard attack and they're very expensive. Pioneers have got all these lovely little bonuses, like using close defense and entrenchment support and the ability to ignore entrenchment and all that kind of thing. You have like Grenadiers, they have the best stats apart from that they have no close defense, which means that they're going to take a lot more damage usually. They are one core slot less than Pioneers. And then you've got these bridge Pioneers who are otherwise totally useless. You don't really need to experiment with utility units like this. This bridge Pioneers are there to bridge rivers, that's it. They're otherwise useless. They're otherwise a wall of meat for the enemy to shoot at. Nevertheless, there could be utility in them, in that you could, you know, if the enemy has particularly dangerous units, you could use them as meat walls. The problem is that if you buy transports for them so that you can actually get them into position to use them as a meat wall, they become very expensive. So you know, 90 plus 70 is 160. That's actually the price of proper infantry without transports. So just something to consider. So I actually think that the Pioneers are probably one of the best infantry units because of all the little bonuses that they get and the fact that they actually have close-in defense. The Weir Infantry have got this forced march ability, which is could situationally be useful because it will allow them to move 4 spaces. So we're just looking at the infantry, but what we are going to do is we are literally just going to be like, okay, let's build an entirely infantry army. Some with transports, some without transports. I mostly think Pioneers are the best, but we'll take some Weir infantry as well. The Grenadiers have high attack but no defense, so I guess you would consider them to be the most useful for attacking a hard target. But you don't want to lead with them. You want to lead with your Pioneers. Now, that knowledge is just coming from actually understanding the stats. Everything I've said so far are things that you would understand just as an average player, just by looking at the units and looking at their roles and having played the game a fair bit. That should come to you relatively easily. You'll note here that buying infantry with transports is actually quite expensive. And your Weir infantry probably doesn't actually need a transport. So let's dismiss this one and replace it with just one without a transport. Because they've got 3 movement and they've got forced march, which is potentially 4 movement. Well, that's a huge amount of movement. That's actually quite alright. Whereas Pioneers have only got 2 movement, so they desperately need transports to actually get anywhere on time. Same for Grenadiers. So this infantry has the benefit that you don't need to provide it with a transport. And it is potentially faster than the cavalry. Because while the cavalry has 5 movement, it is mounted movement. Which means that mounted movement is sort of basically the same as wheeled. It's slowed down dramatically in forest and hard terrain. Whereas, you know, foot movement is not affected by terrain typically. Only like mountains really stop or really slow down foot movement. But, you know, as you play the game, when the game comes out and you start playing it, you're going to understand all of these basics from playing the game. Nothing I've said here is revolutionary. But what we're doing is we are building this huge infantry army because we want to understand what can we achieve just with infantry. That's the knowledge I wanted to acquire in this practice session. So I'm setting up my practice session to do that. I'm not going to assign any of the heroes. I just wanted to show you guys like how cool some of the heroes can be. And some of them are really, really OP. So, okay, so we're done. We've bought as much infantry as we possibly can. I could have probably added a couple of boat pioneers. But I'm not going to do that. So, you know, we have enemy cavalry here. -4, 7. Okay. So, we're not learning anything here because this is just the prediction. And we know that that prediction will work. So we can see the difference in that the pioneers have a reduced attack and initiative, but a strong defense. Whereas the Weir infantry have got actually a slightly better attack and no close defense. Although they do have standard defense. This is not close terrain. Close terrain is like forests and cities and such. So basically, out in the open, the Weir infantry is slightly better. And then we have around here somewhere. I think I had some grenadiers. Did I buy any grenadiers? Yeah, look, here, grenadiers. They're just out of range though. Got 2 sets here. We would probably see that the grenadiers would do even more damage because they've got higher attack ratings. So, okay, fair enough. We understand that infantry lose, although cavalry are also considered infantry, that they lose slightly to cavalry. But what more can we learn? Well, what if, you know, how does the encirclement system work? So what if I start to surround this? How much difference is that going to actually make to my attack? Alright, so now the victim is encircled. And you can see here, it's not really making any difference. That's roughly the result that we had before. Now, the pioneers are going to take 1 less casualty. So, what are we learning? Well, we've just learned that encirclement, at least at this level, a 3-unit encirclement, it makes very little difference as far as infantry is concerned. We're maybe taking 1 less casualty. So, what you're kind of learning is that there's no point in wasting your moves getting an encirclement, because it's only going to make a tiny bit of difference to your attack. As you can see here. And that it looks like when you attack here, this mass attack icon is coming up, only the units that actually have an attack available are taking part. So this truck has helped to enable the encirclement, but it is not helping to improve the mass attack. So we've understood from that in order for the mass attack to actually be more effective, we need to actually have an attack available. So what if I just undo this? What difference does it make if, for example, let's do a forced march here. Can I actually let's pull these boys back. So what if I have more attacks available? Okay, so here we have 3. So I'm just analyzing who can get where. Okay, so in this case now I have 3 infantry surrounding this cavalry. But it's not encircled. And you'll see now that these guys are joining in on the mass attack. So the mass attack is based on having an attack available. And the casualty account has dropped from 6 to 4. A drop of 30%-ish. 1/3. So what we've understood from this is that if I surround the enemy with 3 units, I'm going to drop the casualty meter by 1/3. And that's not bad. Now what if I move a unit to create the encirclement? Does that change anything? It doesn't. So the encirclement has not in any way... It's not affected this unit. Cavalry do not seem to care about being encircled. That may not be true for all units, but we've learnt here that an encirclement doesn't necessarily give you any kind of combat advantage. I know that what it does do is, as long as you're trapped in the encirclement, your supplies will not replenish. But that may not necessarily be important. Especially infantry units. You know, the enemy tends to have enough supplies to do more, do plenty of damage to you. You want to kill them long before their supplies run out. The only units really which supplies become a critical factor are things like artillery, where you can't really get to them. So encircling them and then draining the artillery can be useful. But, that's often a desperation maneuver because you just can't get in there to kill the artillery. So yeah, you can see here that we've basically, by committing 3 units to this, and committing the truck has really not changed anything. By committing 3 units to this, what we've done is we've actually just reduced our casualties by 1/3. Actually, has the encirclement changed that slightly? And this is it. You gotta have a real attention for detail. No. Nah, it's not changed anything really. So you can get a 1/3 bonus by creating a mass attack like this. And you'll have to decide whether that's worth it or not. Okay. Now, probably gotten as much analysis out of that as we could, but there's still more to look at. Like, what if some of these infantry were over strength? Or what if we got more of them? Like, what if we had a total surround? Does it get exponential? Because when we had 2 infantry involved, the casualties dropped by like 1, and it didn't really matter that much. Or in one case you did like 1 extra kill, but nothing particularly huge. And when we added the second one, so it was a 3-man surround, it became, we were taking like a 1/3 less damage, and that's starting to get significant. So what about a 4th one? What about a 5th one? Does it start to reach the point where you just annihilate the enemy and you don't take any damage in return? This is something to think about. So you can see here, this infantry would be 6 for 6. Now the Grenadiers have no defense, but we are gaining an entrenchment bonus here. So this is 6 but -9 because the counterattack is going to be really painful. So what does that mean? Well, what we've learnt there is that we should lead an attack against a city with the Pioneers, because Pioneers have close defense. Even though these guys have got much better attack stats, you're actually not going to achieve anything against the city because of their poor close defense. And the way attacks work is, based on your 2 initiatives, a certain percentage of your attacks go first because you're the attacker. Then a certain percentage of the enemy attacks go based on their initiative against yours. And it swaps back and forth until every unit in the section has attacked. So what that means is that even if you're the attacker, if the enemy has a very high initiative, what can happen is you attack for, say, 2 or 3 of your guys get to attack because you attack first. I don't know the exact numbers yet, but we can try and test and analyze them. Then, if the enemy's got really high initiative, 6 of their guys might fire back, and your guys are going to be defenseless because they're not holed up in the city and entrenched like crazy. So you might potentially take a lot of return fire. These guys are receiving the benefit of a 50% entrenchment ignore bonus, and they're still going to get massacred. Likewise with the Weir infantry, which suffer from the same problem as the grenadiers do, in that they have no close-in defense. So let's just move these boys into position. So we've added a third set. And you can see now that we're down to this point where instead of taking 5 casualties, we're going to take 4. I think it was 5 that we were going to take before. Yep. Now, has that affected these guys? No. They're pretty much both going to still get massacred. So what that tells us is that even if we have a great surround on the enemy, even if we have a great mass attack built up, our units with poor close defense are going to get slaughtered. So, what's the overall lesson that we've learned so far from using infantry? Mass attacks are great for reducing casualties, but only if you have nothing better to do. Because, honestly, just attacking straight up with pioneers is still pretty effective. And if you had, say, an artillery instead to suppress these guys, then you would do better. So, already in my mind, I'm learning a lesson. What I want is pioneers and some way to support them, either aircraft or artillery. I can't just take a city by having a big horde of infantry. I can, but I'm gonna really be hurt for it. I'm actually much better off having the correct infantry for the job, i.e. pioneers, and perhaps 1 cheap artillery just to soften up the enemy. Because, a surround like this is only giving me a bonus of like 10 to 30%. And I could achieve that bonus very easily with an artillery strike. I could achieve more than that bonus, maybe. Most artillery has a suppression of 3 or 4 against infantry and maybe gets a kill. And that's more than a third of the fighting strength of this unit. So you can see, once you soften them up with the pioneers, then it becomes more reasonable to make the attack. And you can see here that the engineer bonus is helping these guys out, but they're still going to take pretty heavy losses. So there's not a good way to set up the attack with just infantry where you're not going to take heavy losses. I mean, this is heavy losses. 4 here, 4 more here, that's 8. So I've lost 8 dudes in exchange for 12. Now obviously this guy is an easy cleanup from here, but that's huge. And by including this guy in the mass attack, I've used his turn. So he can now no longer sweep in and make the kill. So that's, I've learnt here that perhaps mass attacking is just not worth the effort. If I have nothing better to do, and I won't need the unit to do anything else, then fine, great, get the bonus. But otherwise, maybe this is a system I should just ignore. Maybe I should not really plan around that as my strategy, because it doesn't seem to be helping me that much. Compared to the value of one move, of, the infantry being able to go wherever I want it to go and actually attack somebody. Just standing there and providing mass attack support does not seem to be that great. Now, obviously, you'd want to test it further, so perhaps in a future practice session, we'd include some recons and see how much difference adding a recon makes, because that provides another bonus to the whole mass attack equation. But anyway, there's still more to learn, and this is what you do: is you go through and you practice and you look at things and you come to understand what is good and what is not good. So if we go back to the deployment now, what if... So we decided that pioneers are really quite good. Now what if I overstrength them? So let's go with a 20 stack of pioneers, okay? Let's go purchase that. Sounds good to me. We'll get a couple to test with. So let's overstrength these ones too. And let's just buy some cheap artillery. Like really cheap. Cheapest artillery ever. So we learnt that mass attacking and surrounding was really not that important. So understanding that, maybe what's important is to just have one big powerful unit. Maybe that's more important. And maybe just having, you know, the cheapest, nastiest artillery support. Maybe that's fine. So let's test that theory out. So we've got the cheapest, nastiest artillery here. Give it a wagon as well. Not that we really need to. But this is part of our testing strategy here. Okay. We'll forget about the rest of the army for now. We've gone for this instead. So instead of that huge, massive infantry that we had, we've just got 4 units. That's it. And the artillery is literally just two core slot, as cheap as I can possibly get it. Alright, let's go. So, how much difference does overstrength make? Well, that is a little bit of difference there, but not much. I think -7, -5 is roughly about the same as what we saw before. I think slightly better than what we saw before. Now, I would have a notepad typically, and I'd be writing all this down, so I would know, you know, on my notepad I would have infantry, you know, 15 stack against cavalry, -4, -7, whatever. 20 stack against cavalry, -5, -7. You know, surrounded, stack, blah 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 blah. You write these details down so that I can compare it in my head and come to an understanding about how things work. So the bigger stack is not making the hugest difference to the cavalry attack. What about to the city attack? Well, now that's quite a big difference. -8, -6. Now, I think previously it was more like -5, -6. So, over-strengthening this unit against infantry in the city has actually hugely improved its effectiveness. Hugely! About, well, 3/8. 3/8 more enemy losses. That's pretty big. But against the units in the open, it's not made the hugest difference, at least as far as pioneers are concerned. Now, what if we add that little bit of artillery support? And of course, I've made the mistake here that this artillery is actually not fast enough to get in position. So we'll do this test next turn. So here we've got a suppression of 4 with the cheapest artillery. Go on then. Okay, how much difference has that made? Well, now it's become an even trade. So that's made quite a bit of difference. Still not exactly the best exchange though. So what we're learning here, more than anything, is that cavalry are actually just really good against infantry. But they are incredibly expensive, to be fair. But they don't have any entrenchment, they are just simply a unit that's there. I believe these guys are holed up in the city with a reasonable entrenchment. So, some difference is being made. Oh, they actually come out of the city. That's annoying. Okay, so that's ruined our test. And that's not a problem. What we can do is we can just restart the scenario and reposition so that the test won't be ruined. There's no point in testing stuff without actually doing it in a controlled way. Otherwise, you might not be learning anything. Or you might be learning something wrong, which is even worse. So what I really need to do is just put this here and put the my cheapest, nastiest artillery. You should probably turn off the randomness for practice, actually, but I like practicing with just what I know I'm going to be using. Okay. And one thing so we did the cavalry test. One thing I also wanted to test was, you know, what about overstrength infantry that's actually quite good in the open? So pioneers are not so great in the open due to their low stats. Even though they've got great close defense, but that only comes into play in close environments. So, you know, what if I overstrengthed some grenadiers? Or some weir infantry. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce that, but I'm going to presume that it is weir. Okay. So, against cavalry, what if we have, you know, 2 overstrength units? Well, you can actually see that the damage is actually pretty solid against these cavalry. But whether the mass attack is once again not making the hugest of differences here. But what is mattering is the artillery. You know, with force suppression, that's 1 casualty down straight away. Although that's roughly the same as the mass attack, but you can combine the two. So now we're actually starting to reach the point where we might murder the enemy and not really take much response for it. So we only took 5 losses this time. And that's quite impressive. That's pretty good. So overstrength with a little bit of artillery support is working out. Obviously, because we overstrength these, they have a higher core slot cost. So we are compressing more units into the same space. But with infantry, it's difficult to apply all of that force to one place because they're quite slow. Not like Recon cars where you can just move them as much or as little as you like. So let's have a look at this down here again. So we're looking at the same situation here. -8, -6, because the overstrength is helping us a little bit here. Okay, so 3 suppression, and we've probably hurt their entrenchment. But that doesn't matter because pioneers ignore entrenchment. So just thinking about that in your head, just realize that your entrenchment's not going to matter. You can see it's not actually made the hugest difference in this case. We have forced them to retreat though. So we've exchanged 5 for 8, which is actually, that's alright. And if we had some other infantry or some units here, we would sweep in and clean them up. So mass infantry, perhaps not the best idea, except against cities it seems to be okay. So a couple of pioneers against the city, it will bring the city down faster than a pioneer plus artillery. But pioneer plus artillery might result in fewer casualties, but it's going to take longer. So that's good knowledge to have. So it probably means that if I want to take cities on a tight turn limit, I just want pioneers. That's it. Bring pioneers and attack with them. But if I want to do things without taking casualties, or if I want to take out enemies in the open, then artillery is very effective in preventing me from taking return fire. But let's look at another interaction. What if we have a recon? How much difference does that make? So we've learnt that mass attacks seem to matter, you know, about 10% for one guy involved in it and a third for two guys involved in it. But what if we have one of these scout cars, and they're quite cheap actually. So let's add some recons. And let's just bring 3 weird infantry to the pie. Just gonna test them out here. Alright, so how much difference does this make? Are recons better than artillery situationally? That's the question I want to answer when it comes to infantry. Okay, so the first thing obviously is that recons are actually pretty good against cavalry. Alright, so we've added a recon to the situation. And you can see here, we're actually taking 1 less casualty. It was definitely -6, -7 previously. Now it's -6, -6. So that recon has actually made a difference, sort of like a mass attack would. Okay, -5. So, what have we learned here? Well, we've learned, apart from the fact that recons are good against cavalry, it's not really made much of a difference. It's actually honestly not made much of a difference. We took 1 less loss because of the presence of the recon car when there was 1 guy there. But that's not really a huge difference over the mass attack bonus that we have seen. So, what a recon is doing for you, in terms of infantry, is it seems to just be giving you roughly the same kind of bonus as a mass attack would. But the benefit, of course, with the recon is that it can position itself wherever, thanks to its special movement. And the pair of recons together are actually, you know, they're getting an extra kill here because the 2 of them are together. But yeah, it's still -7, -6 here. So the second recon is really not changing anything. -7, -6. So still -6 in both cases. So the recons are not actually decreasing my casualties. I'm going to take -6 no matter what. But I'm going to get more work done after I've taken my losses. And part of that will be because I believe cavalry have a very high initiative. Find out now that infantry have got 4. Oh no, it's the same. No, it's the same. So, what the recons are doing are allowing me to inflict more damage. But they are not in. They do not. And this surprises me to learn this. I didn't know this. The recons are not lowering the amount of casualties I'm going to take. I'm going to take the same amount of casualties whether they are there or not. That makes no difference. I'm going to lose 6 guys no matter what. All they're doing is allowing me to inflict more hurt on the enemy. So what that means is if I've got recons, they will be useful for units which no damage, no return is expected. In other words, artillery and aircraft. Because artillery and aircraft will attack and they will not take any return fire. So recons are useful for allowing artillery and aircraft to inflict more damage, or any unit to inflict more damage, but it will not change the amount of return fire you take. That is very interesting to know. So that means that bringing recons along to try and minimize losses is a fool's errand unless you're using artillery or aircraft. There isn't like a huge point in bringing recons along to try and take less losses with your infantry. They're going to take the same amount of losses. Of course, they'll inflict more damage to the enemy, which might mean less losses in some future engagement. But is that worth the price of, you know, paying for a recon and setting it down and all that kind of thing when, you know, maybe you could have another stack of infantry, maybe you could have a tank or something, or an artillery piece. This is interesting knowledge to learn. So yeah, I've reduced their numbers. And I'm going to take 3 losses because I've reduced their numbers from 15 to 10. But I'm going to inflict the same amount of damage, 7. So the recons are enhancing my damage, but that does not in any way reduce my losses. Even in a case where there's less enemies, I'm still relatively going to take the same losses whether the recons are there or not. As you can see. All it's doing is changing the damage. Which is interesting because the mass attack bonus did reduce the return damage. So the mass attack caused you to take less losses, whereas the recon causes you to do more damage. So you, taking that knowledge on board, if I need to kill someone fast and I don't care about the losses, you know, it's the final turn, I must take the city, I gotta kill it now, I want recons, because it's going to enhance my damage and let me power down that target. Now, if I have plenty of time and I want to prevent casualties so I can save lots of prestige, then I want a mass attack, because a mass attack is reducing the amount of losses I take. And this is basically what you need to do. If you want to go from average or good to being really great, you want to understand all the edge cases and what, you know, don't settle for thinking that you sort of understand how all the interactions work. Just actually go ahead and test the interactions, and you'll come to some surprising conclusions sometimes. So they're really sort of pushing the idea of combined arms in this. But, you know, I remember one game where it was optimal to just buy nothing but artillery. And the reason why, it was stupid, but the reason why was because when the enemy attacked you, they they triggered return fire from all the nearby artillery. And so if you had nothing but artillery, what would happen was the enemy would attack one of your units, and like your ball of artillery would all fire at the poor bastard and they would be annihilated. And then the next enemy would attack and the same thing would happen, because you get like 5 or 6 artillery return fires before they even could attack. And so a ball of artillery just became the most powerful thing in the game, stopped only by aircraft. And you just keep a couple of anti-aircraft guns around for that. And it was so silly. You just have a ball of artillery just going across the map and just parking it somewhere and inviting the enemy to attack it. And the AI would go, oh, there's exposed artillery, let us attack. And they would attack the exposed artillery, and 5 artillery pieces would counter-battery them before the attack started, and they'd be annihilated. And then the AI would go, oh, there's exposed artillery, let us attack. And the second unit would come and attack the artillery, seeing a vulnerable target, and they would get blasted as well. So some really absurd stuff can happen if you really look into the game and how it works. So from our earlier testing, we should have reached the conclusion that pioneers are great for cleaning out cities, and if you can support them with artillery, that's great. And if you've got nothing better to do, then a mass attack can reduce the odd loss. But generally speaking, they are effective against cities unsupported. Just send them in and push the defenders out. It's as simple as that. You'll take some extra losses maybe, but you don't actually need to support them. They're plenty effective just going in by themselves. And to be honest, all the effort that you put into trying to make them more effective actually doesn't really change that much. But units in the open ground, like this cavalry here, artillery is very effective. So if you put some artillery on them, you know, this was 6 minus 7. We've reduced the amount of casualties we'll take by 4, which is well over 50%. So artillery is pretty good at suppressing a unit, and if I had another infantry unit here, I could probably clean these guys up with taking minimal losses. But yeah, a final sort of conclusion to come from all of this is, in many previous TBS games, it made a lot of sense to use artillery and bombers and surrounds, etc. to that dramatically changed the outcome of a fight. You know, it could change a fight from you getting massacred to you massacring the enemy. You know, it can make a huge swing of difference. But in this game, all these little bonuses, you know, the recon bonus, the surround bonus, etc., what they do is quite marginal. Honestly speaking, it's relatively marginal. It seems to me like just having the right unit for the job is actually the main thing. Like, you know, if you had the right unit for the job, so the right unit for the job here is probably a big fat heavy tank like this, overstrength or something, 330 prestige, not even that expensive, 6 core slots. And there you go, that's the right unit for the job. 5 kills, 1 loss. Look at how much less effort that was. All those infantry, all that artillery, all that faffing around that we did against this unit in the open to try and really kill it and really maximize our efficiency. And honestly, none of it really mattered compared to just having a half-decent tank and just shooting the guys point blank. Or, you know, in this case, you know, having a couple of tanks, sorry. So, you know, this is the first tank and I've taken 1 loss, which is going to cost me basically next to nothing. And maybe having a second tank would enable me to finish the job. So you can see... sorry, just clear my throat. You can see here that the tank could definitely be expected to clean out this cavalry. And that the cavalry really couldn't do anything about it. There's nothing that the cavalry could really do about it. And what did it cost me in the end? Well, if I want to reinforce in battle, it's going to cost me 35 prestige, which is almost nothing. And of course, in the deployment phase, it's going to be half that. It's going to be 35 for high prestige units. Now, obviously, I overstrengthened this tank just to make the point, but basically, having the right unit for the job here definitely got the job done. But if you look at the city situation, and I'll just reinforce this so that we have a fair test. If we look at the city situation, where the pioneers did well, tanks get absolutely massacred. Like, it's not even close. It's horrendous. So, we need our pioneers to clean out cities. There's no other way to clean out a city efficiently than to use pioneers and accept some losses. Unless you have, you know, late game tanks or really devastating artillery. But as it stands, at least in the early game, we want some pioneers for cleaning out cities, and other than that, which is really important because, you know, taking cities is like 90% of this game. So don't get me wrong, that is important. We want pioneers for that purpose, and we want maybe 4 or 5 of them for cleaning out cities so that we can push through on a timeline. And as for all the rest of the stuff, it's just kind of fluff. We want tanks for dealing with people out in the open. Artillery makes some difference. More difference than massing up infantry does. And all the little, you know, all the little bonuses, surround bonus, recon bonus, all that kind of stuff, it doesn't make the biggest difference. It doesn't really change that much. It's marginal. It's 10% here, it's 10% there. And that adds up. But it's not worth building for it. It's not worth... You know, if you need another set of tanks to deal with a whole horde of enemy cavalry, that's what you want to get. You don't want to, you know, you don't want to think in your mind, oh, I can be more efficient by having some recons, or, you know, I can soften them up with artillery or whatever. It honestly doesn't make that much of a difference. You might as well just plow in with tanks and get rid of them that way. So in that scenario, a hard counter is more important than anything else. So anyway, this is a very, very long video, and I'm kind of killing my voice here, but I just wanted to sort of give you guys some insight into how I practice and how I go from just sort of being a decent player, or being a good player, a very good player maybe, if you know, probably think of me as a very good player. I actually don't think of myself as being a great player, but I'm always reaching for greatness. This practice regimen is how I reach for greatness, is to just actually go in a controlled environment and just assess how things really work. So then when I'm sat here playing in front of you guys, I'm like, I've got 2 pioneers here and I've got 2 tanks here, right? I'm playing in front of you guys and I've got 2 pioneers here and 2 tanks here. My tanks roll in and annihilate the cavalry, and then I use a recon to clean them up. And then my pioneers roll down here with an artillery piece and push these guys out of the city. And I'm kicking ass and I look great. But that knowledge, that understanding of how the infantry works and when it's useful, etc., and when it's not useful, which is also important to know, it comes from practice sessions like this. So anyway, I did this video as a thank you because I appreciate the support of everybody. I live a very frugal life at the moment because I have full-time Norwegian school, so I can't work. Apart from to play video games on YouTube for you guys. That's the only thing I can really do while I have full-time Norwegian school. And my mouse, that has served me so well for half a decade, is starting to die, and you guys have sort of reached out to me with a bit of Patreon support for that, and I really appreciate it. So I put this extra video together to thank you guys in particular. Ramgar and Nathan have really helped me out here. And another person who's went by their real name, so I don't know if I should say that on here, but I really appreciate you guys. I hope you found this video interesting. It was done as a special bonus for you, and just wanted to reveal to you guys, let you get into my head a little bit about my practice regimen and how to go from good to great, in this case by studying infantry. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time.